Do you find that you can correctly pronounce words in structured tasks like reading, but then you go back to your old habits when talking spontaneously? Then keep listening because this video is for you. Hi, I'm Lori from Pronunciation Pro. Usually in my videos, I provide one small snippet of information about American English pronunciation. However, today I'm going to cover one of the most common questions that I get asked by my students. How can I transfer what I can successfully do in reading into conversational speech? This is something that every language learner faces because at some point you have to move away from the words being in print in front of you and start putting your own words together in spontaneous speech. My students will ask me, how can I remember and keep track of all the pronunciation rules I've learned when I'm speaking conversationally? And my answer is, you can't. It's impossible to focus on pronunciation rules when you're trying to convey a message. You simply don't have the bandwidth to do that, at least not to do it well. In conversation, you're focused on the message, not on how you're moving your mouth. And that's as it should be, because that's why we converse, to communicate a message. But that means that in spontaneous speech, you'll go back to what is habitual for you. Let me give you an example. You may know intellectually that this word is pronounced with, and in structured tasks, you pronounce it perfectly. However, in conversational speech, you might say things like, I'm going to meet with her, or can I talk with you? What you know intellectually about how to pronounce this word doesn't transfer over because you're still following your old pronunciation habits when you're focused on the message. So how do you learn to use correct pronunciation in spontaneous speech then? The answer is you have to make a new habit. Remember how I said that in spontaneous speech you'll go back to what is habitual for you? Well, that means that you have to replace your old habits of movement on certain words with new ones. How do you do that? The same way you establish any other habit, repetition. There is no substitute for this. It's time-consuming and repetitive, but it's the only way to make new habits. So, you keep a list of your problem words and you practice them over and over and over, not just for 1 day or 2 days, but on a daily basis for weeks. Here's another important thing about that daily practice. Don't stay at the isolated word level. We don't speak in isolated words, we speak in phrases. So you have to practice that word in phrases that are meaningful to you, phrases you would actually say during the course of your day. It's the process of getting in and out of that word that has to be practiced, because that's when you'll want to go back to old habits that are more comfortable for you. And by the way, don't write down your practice phrases. Make yourself come up with spontaneous new phrases using that word every time you practice. If you don't introduce that element of spontaneity into your practice, you won't be able to say that word correctly in real conversation. I'm going to give you an example from my own experience. About 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to dance. So I started taking ballroom and swing dance lessons. I learned just enough to get by on the social dance floor, and then I pretty much stopped taking lessons and just went out social dancing on a fairly regular basis. Well, the problem with this is that I've developed some bad habits that I've been reinforcing for the last 10 years on the dance floor. I'm not a bad dancer, but I'm also not a good dancer. I'm just a mediocre dancer. The thing is, I want to be a good dancer. So the only way I'm going to change those habits is to specifically work on them on a regular basis until I replace them with new habitual patterns of movement. For me, this means going back to private lessons. And regarding that aspect of spontaneity, it's really important in my lessons that my instructor doesn't always lead the exact same patterns. This would only teach me to do those movements correctly in those patterns. Instead, I have to learn to follow correctly and move correctly when a variety of different patterns are being led. Repetition and practice with those movements in unexpected patterns is what will really help me to become a good dancer. So you can see that this concept applies to any movement pattern that you're trying to change, whether it's body movements or mouth movements. Now, if your issue is more related to aspects of rhythm or intonation, then you should be practicing listening to and imitating the speech of native speakers on a daily basis. This is how native children learn to speak the language. They don't memorize rules, they practice imitating over and over until they sound like the people around them. Good resources for this listening and imitating practice are TED Talks, YouTube videos, audiobooks, basically any form of media that will allow you to hit the pause button so that you can practice saying that phrase just like the native speaker said it, with the same up and down movements in pitch and the same stretching out of certain syllables. You're going to feel kind of like an actor learning to get into character, but this is part of learning the sound and rhythm of another language. The value of this listening and imitation practice cannot be emphasized enough. So, the answer to the question, how do I transfer what I know how to do in reading to conversational speech, is this: practice, practice, practice until you make a new habit. There is no shortcut for this because in spontaneous speech, you will use the patterns that are habitual for you. If you found this information to be helpful, please like my video and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be covering other frequently asked questions in future videos, so if you subscribe, you'll know when the next one is uploaded. In the meantime, happy practicing, and I'll see you in the next video.